Whoever wraps in a talit in their youth will never forget. Taking it out of the soft velvet bag, opening the folded talit, spreading it out, kissing the length of the neckband, some of them embroidered, others trimmed in gold. After that, with a great unfurling overhead like a sky, a wedding canopy, a parachute, and then winding it around the head as if playing hide and seek, and then wrapping his whole body in it tight, tight, snuggling into it like the cocoon of a butterfly, then opening would-be wings to fly. And why is the talit striped and not checkered, black and white like a chessboard? Because squares are finite and hopeless. Stripes come from endlessness and go to endlessness like runways in an airport where angels land and take off. Whoever wraps in a talit will never forget when he gets out of the swimming pool or the sea. He wraps himself in a large towel, spreads it out again over his head, and again snuggles into it, tight, tight, still shivering a little, and laughs and blesses. This poem was written by my favorite Hebrew poet, Yehuda Amichai. His work challenges the role of God and explores the meaning of Jewish prayer, elaborating on ritual objects and offering both ironic and heartfelt personal stories and inventions. In this particular section of a longer work, he earnestly investigates the talit from childhood to adulthood. I love his poetry so much because every line invites us to rethink our patterns and our objects. I wear a talit every week, and Henry, you now have one to wear as well. The commandment to place tzitzit, these fringes, on four-cornered garments comes from Parashat Shalach Lecha in the book of Numbers, and it furnishes the third paragraph of the Shema. The talit gadol, or large talit that Henry is wearing, is the prayer shawl ritually donned during the morning service. Jewish children wear talitot at B'nai Mitzvah. Adults stand beneath them at their weddings and then are buried in them after death. The developmental nature of this poem shows us how Amichai's relationship to the talit and therefore to the religious community of his childhood changes shape over the course of his life. The poem begins, and you should have this in front of you. There should be a sheet that you have the text in front of you. Great, okay. The poem begins, "Whoever wraps in a talit in their youth will never forget." At a bar or bat mitzvah, a child takes on the responsibility of following the commandments, or for us, adhering to their values. This is customarily symbolized by wearing a talit for the first time. The first section of this poem is instructional in nature and describes how to wear a talit. The blessing itself contains the word hitatef, or to wrap, also used in the first line of Amichai's poem to invoke the first step of this ritual. Tzitzit serve as a visual reminder of the obligation to fulfill mitzvot and to heed God's commandments. Amichai earnestly comments on this reasoning by saying, "Whoever wrapped in a talit as a child will never forget this ritual of wearing it, but in a much more poignant sense, will never forget Judaism and God's commandments." It is for this reason that he uses the word le'olam in the first line of the poem. This word appears countless times in our holy texts. It means world or eternity or afterlife, or as a descriptor for God. Here, I like to think of it as meaning beyond time and space, that the Judaism we feel when we recite blessings are with us, le'olam, are with us forever, regardless of the changes that our lives bring us. Amichai continues with the poem, taking it out of the soft velvet bag, opening the folded talit, spreading it out, kissing the length of the neckband, some embroidered, some trimmed in gold. In reading these lines, you can almost hear how a parent lovingly teaches a child. The bag is soft, the talit is folded inside like mekupelet, the thinly folded Israeli chocolate bar. The similes used in the next line illustrate the childlike wonder that permeates the entire poem. He says, after that, with a great unfurling overhead like a sky, a wedding canopy, a parachute. A child in synagogue looking up at an adult putting on a talit, the great unfurling can take on a mystical or magical quality. He uses similes to make three associations: the sky, the chuppah, the wedding canopy, and a parachute. First, he says shamayim, or sky. This word, in addition to hitatef and olam, has an inherently biblical quality. Shamayim is the visible sky as well as heaven, the dwelling place of God. As such, Shamayim is a metonymic identifier for God's self. Secondly, Amichai compares the unfurling and the lifting of the talit to a chuppah, a wedding canopy. To a child, a talit gadol indeed seems quite large and might resemble the third association of a menatzeach, a parachute. This word references the gear of a paratrooper and a uniquely Israeli life cycle event that we all know is joining the army. These three images, sky, chuppah, parachute, represent the accepted, the familiar, and the disparate. In placing these three together, Amichai defamiliarizes this holy object. These similes are layered, both childlike and twinged with the sadness that is attached to aging. He reorients back to the narrative of the child by continuing to describe the talit choreography in a naive way, invoking childhood play and fascination with the developmental transformation of caterpillars into butterflies, like that of children into adults. It reads, winding it around his head as if playing hide and seek, wrapping his whole body in it tight, snuggling into it like the cocoon of a butterfly, then opening would-be wings to fly. From a child's eye view, when one drapes the talit over one's head, it might very well seem as though the wearer is playing hide and seek. For Amichai, the feeling of wrapping in a talit elicits the comfort experienced when wrapped in a blanket, repeating tsmuda, tight, words a parent might whisper to their child who is cold. As the wearer tosses the sides of the talit over their shoulders, their arms sort of extend in a flapping motion as if they are flying. Amichai thus compares a butterfly emerging from a cocoon to this part of the ritual. At the same time, he expresses the confinement he felt in the Orthodox community of his childhood and his need to break free of that in order to become himself and fly away. His use of the word knafayim holds multiple meanings. On the most basic level, knafayim are wings, as in the wings of a butterfly. In the book of Numbers, the Israelites are commanded to affix fringes, al kanfei bigdehem, on the corners of their clothes. Amichai thus grounds his metaphor of the opened talit as wings in a lexical connection between the corners of the talit and the wings of a bird or a butterfly. He continues by saying, why is the talit striped and not checkered, black and white like a chessboard? Because squares are finite and hopeless. Again, he yokes the childlike experience with an adult understanding. A child asks why. Why does the talit have stripes? And compares it to a chessboard. These lines tell us about the limited experience of the child, the talit in the synagogue, the chessboard at home. Perhaps Amichai is saying that the bounded square of observance became finite and hopeless for him. Many Jewish ritual objects are square-shaped, including the talit. Nothing, of course, is more finite than death, when we are buried in a four-cornered shroud and put into a four-cornered box. Life bound by religious observance is then a travel between squares, rigid in their boundaries and only ever black or white, a chess game. He continues, stripes come from endlessness and go to endlessness like runways in an airport where angels land and take off. The term Ein Sof, that's the Hebrew word for endlessness, is the Kabbalistic understanding of God's true essence. God has no beginning, no end, and transcends time and space. While this is conceptually kind of difficult to grasp, Amichai pairs it with an airplane, the man-made, commonplace machine that seems to defy gravity. In this two-tiered metaphor, he describes the stripes of the talitot as the runway at the airport where angels land and take off from infinity. His reference to the angels, the airport, and earlier to the sky, the parachute, the butterfly wings, all of these indicate the speaker's yearning for open space and freedom. The poem is polarized in these two opposite experiences, the warm embrace of the talit and the closeness that it comes with versus the desire to fly away. He continues, and this is the end of the section, but it's the best part of the poem. Whoever wraps in a talit will never forget when he gets out of the swimming pool or the sea. He wraps himself in a large towel, spreads it out again over his head, snuggling into it tight, tight, still shivering a little, and laughs and blesses. Here, Amichai describes the closest experience he, in his secular adulthood, has to the ritual of donning a talit, that of coming out of the sea or the swimming pool. Each time he briefly relives wrapping himself in the talit of his childhood, maybe reflecting on his own bar mitzvah, the physical talit itself and the non-material memories that it represents. He tosses it over his head and wraps himself tight, tight, but now because he's cold from having come out of the water. The poem concludes with three verbs: shivers, laughs, and blesses. Literally, he shivers as a physical response to the temperature change, but perhaps he also shudders when he catches himself reliving the religious experience of his childhood over and over. By removing religious objects from their context, Amichai unapologetically asserts that Judaism, Jewish ritual, and their emotional or spiritual associations shouldn't be confined to the synagogue. In his own way, his swimming at an Israeli beach and wrapping a towel around himself afterward is indeed as Jewish of an experience as the one from his childhood. He cannot sift his religious knowledge and vocabulary, both which came from a religious childhood that he remembers fondly, out from the life that he leads as an adult. He thinks about this, laughs to himself, and says a blessing. Whoever put on a talit as a youngster will never forget taking it out of the soft velvet bag, opening the folded shawl, spreading it out, kissing the neckband, embroidered or trimmed in gold. Then swinging it in a great swoop, spreading wide like wings for flying. And why does a talit have stripes and not black and white squares like a chessboard? Because squares are finite, without hope, and stripes come from infinity and go on to infinity. Like runaways at the airport, so that angels may land and take off. Whoever put on a talit will never forget coming out of a swimming pool or the sea